to increase, of course, and then also the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the lockdown in the last few days.
Yeah. Dr. Asha, let's talk about the COVID-19 and the new lockdown that is now here. The third wave is here with us. What are some of the measures you've put in place, and which ones worked that you think can work now that we're in the third wave?
I think what was very critical was, of course, to ensure that there was provision of the safety net, social safety net for people who had lost their livelihood. And this we did through giving households, a cash amount per month for a few months to be able to cushion them and for them to have the cash to be able to not only just buy food, but also other basic needs. And there were also quite a number, almost 50,000 households that we were able to also donate or distribute food in kind, which was very important because it was not always the case in all situations that people could buy the food even if they were given the cash. So those were very critical in ensuring that people could still stay at home and observe the IPC measures, but still be able to cater for their other basic needs.
Kwame, from an economic perspective, how would you advise the government now that we're in this hole that we're dealing with right now? Kwame, I think your sound is on mute. Kindly unmute first.
Okay, my apologies. I think that just when everybody thought that some recovery was taking place after January, then it looks like obviously the announcements made last week will take us much further back. And as you can tell, many enterprises and businesses that had hoped to use the new year and some of the momentum for their growth and to recover would definitely be in a far worse place. And I think what this tells is that perhaps I think government took its eyes off the pedal, or rather its foot off the pedal far too early. And the new measures that were announced, especially, of course, the curfews and the limits in the 5 counties that have been most affected, makes sense in terms of controlling the spread, but they're extremely injurious to businesses, especially the smaller businesses that are anticipated that there was time for this to continue. So what it tells is that last year, of course, there was a proposal for a lifeline fund for businesses to be able to support and keep their people in place. I think that with the benefit of hindsight, now seems to have been an opportunity that was missed. My hope, though, is that if the vaccination can be ramped up, basically, so that of course many more people are able to resume work without the risk of getting unwell, then obviously that will be the far better opportunity. Yeah.
But Kwame, what kind of social safety net would work at this particular point? We already know the government itself is struggling to get revenue. Yeah. What would work now?
Well, last year, government attempted some safety nets. I mean, in the sense that some money was sent to, especially, varying sums of money was spent to people in urban areas. And then at the same time, there's a work program that the government started. Had mixed results because some of the feedback that was received about how government spent that money and how some of the youth who were supposed to be employed, whether they received the full amount, was a different issue altogether. But on the whole, the best thing would have been actually to try basically to provide safety nets and support in terms of cash or kind to the poorest 20% of households or some amount, because those are the most vulnerable people. And that would help because it would be like a stimulus in real terms. Instead, what we had last year was actually the stimulus was, in terms of the social spending, was very low. What happened instead was that the huge tax cuts, or rather the substantial tax cuts that government gave, were useful because they allowed businesses, but also for individuals to support many more people indirectly. In this year, that is not something that was considered last week, or at least has not been discussed so far. And the tax cuts were taken out in January and new taxes introduced. So the effects of those actually have just mean that while we were crawling out of the trough, I think there'll be a little bit more sinking, and businesses are going to suffer quite a bit more than was necessary.
Kwame, is it just me, or are we stuck in some kind of a loop? Because then how do they justify social safety nets by cash disbursement, and how long will they sustain that, considering that the same workforce is right now out of work? So taxation is also on the minimum.
Well, I think what a safety net like has been proposed would do is just basically to make sure that there's no shock demand shock in terms of what people can spend. And I think right now what's going to happen is that as people can't work, you can tell most of the establishments, not just the small restaurants, the large restaurants, even some big hotels, had reservations that have been cancelled. So what that means is that they're not able to, and have asked their workers who perhaps have been just on the job for 2 months as they try to recover, to go back home again. So it's as if we were digging our way out and then we've gone back. Now, safety net would have helped because it would have helped to stabilize spending, some incomes for people, and then also spending, which makes sure that the multiply effect would have led to a much sooner recovery, much sooner. In a situation in which there's a shock, like both a health shock and obviously the difficulties last year, it's not prudent immediately to think about what it means for the fiscal balance, except that the government of Kenya already had very serious problems paying its bills, and obviously with a huge debt flow. So a lot of things have converged to show that it's going to be a much more difficult one. And then the policy choices that were taken in terms of the fiscal, the recovery strategy was far too modest and it was too timid. And this is what this time is proving to us.
Okay. Dr. Asha, you have done this before. We're talking about cash disbursements. Right now as we speak, what percentage of the population do you think will need this? And what amounts are we talking about here? Is it 40, 70% of the population in those rural areas? And how much are we talking about in terms of disbursement?
Well, Trevor, maybe I can't say exactly how much, but I would say in terms of percentage, at least 50% would require this support. And if we look at the data we had already from last year, you could see that in some of the informal settlements, you had actually more than 50% of the population there that was already actually not able to generate any income, whether it was because of job losses, but also remember there are others actually who don't even have jobs even before the pandemic. So the number is likely to increase, as I said as well, considering some of the other disasters that may actually happen in the coming days. Maybe also just to say that I think one of the things we really need to look at is, apart from the social safety nets and the food distribution, is maybe to look for other forms of how some of these basic needs can be attained. And just to share an example of what we've been doing as Kenya Red Cross since last year, trying to pilot a model, of community inclusion currencies, where it's almost like a barter trade system, where the community sort of agrees, and there's a voucher system that is used. For example, let's say I'm a hairdresser. I can actually make someone's hair, and maybe this person has a food kiosk, and we can be able to trade that, so that I can be able to give a service, and I can do that in exchange of some food or something similar. So I think it's about now maybe looking a little bit out of the box, because we cannot probably continue only with the same methods that we've done. And I think, as has been said, the question of whether the cash will actually be available to continue to do these cash transfers. So in the event that this is not possible, then what else can we do to actually cushion the communities?
Yeah, but Dr. Asha, then the other issue is, how did you decide that this family is vulnerable enough to get this disbursement and not the other?
Well, there is a criteria that is used and certain indicators that are followed, and this also we do this also in conjunction with the Ministry of Labor and the administration and the Nyumba Kumi system to actually identify the most vulnerable. I think the challenge here, Trevor, is that what we realize as well is that the numbers kept on changing. Because today you do the registration, and let's say you have 10,000 households in this particular informal settlement, and a few weeks later more people lose their jobs. So how do you ensure then that people who continue to fall out are actually accommodated? Because if we stick with the lists that we have, some of it already taken on from what the Ministry of Labor already has, then of course we miss out on a lot of people that fall during the year. And I think last year was a classical example where we started in May, and the statistics we gave for May, but by the time we were finishing the year, we had many more people who had lost their jobs.
Yeah. Let me play some of the sound bites that are coming through to our newsrooms from the people who've actually gone through this. This is what they had to say.
After Rais ali-announce on Saturday, ndio sasa barua tukapata jana ya kwamba management haiwezi to reserve hapa kwa sababu sasa kazi yetu ni kama imekuwa chini, hakuna wateja kwa kampuni. Wenye tulikuwa tunategemea ni hao international tourists na local tourists. Hivi kwamba wengine wamekuwa lockdown, hawawezi fika mahali hapa. Pata tu namna ya kwenda nyumbani. Itabidi tu niende nyumbani juu sasa hakuna vile nafanya kazi. Siwezi kaa kwa kampuni, sina income yoyote nategemea kwa sababu tena familia ikiwa nyumbani na mimi niko Nairobi wanafikiria mimi niko kazi. Ili hali siko kazi.
Mimi natokea kule maeneo ya magharibi mwa Kenya. Hata sasa hivi tunavyozungumza sijui nitafika vipi nyumbani. Sijui itakuaje kwa sababu management imesema haiwezi accommodate kwa sababu hakuna income. Hapa tumeambiwa tunaenda nyumbani mpaka vitu vikuje viwe tena sawa. Manake kuangazia ile speech ya rais alisema until further notice. Sasa that further notice ndio hatujui ni lini vitu zitakuja zireje ziwe sawa.
And Kwame, now what would be the solution to like the people you've just had speaking right now? They've lost their jobs. Economically, what is the most viable thing to do now?
Well, if the government of Kenya had some reserves or had some money, then obviously it's possible that these are the people who would be most entitled to some kind of support, say, as David D. once suggested, a lifeline support which would be given to the businesses so that the businesses can keep their workers in place at least for a while, because that helps with stabilizing both businesses but also helping the lives of their workers. Now, that's not possible now given the kind of where the government is. But at the same time, I think it reflects in a way the choices that were made last year, because it's not as if government of Kenya did not receive. Government of Kenya received quite a lot of support, both to build resilience in the health system, but also at the same time to put some money towards ensuring that incomes are stabilized to the extent that was possible. I think also that the reason the president announced these very harsh measures was, of course, because the infections were going up. And while it is true that the infections suggested that their risk had actually been elevated, the real problem is not these workers. The problem has been inadequate enforcement. So, for instance, whether you want to blame politicians for the rallies that took place, or whether you just want to blame Kenyans for walking around without their masks, or for specific establishments allowing people to go in beyond the numbers that were allowed, beyond the curfew times, those are enforcement problems. And there's nothing that tells me that strengthening or rather tightening the curfew without fair enforcement that does not necessarily lead to police getting an opportunity to squeeze more money out of people will be helpful. So in a way, it reflects government's fiscal choices which have been inadequate, at the same time the enforcement that was taken which has also failed. So it's very sad because we failed these people twice over.
Having seen that, Kwame, is this the time then to suspend certain policy directives? For example, the minimum tax that is now in place. We've seen the prices of fuel go higher. And these are decisions that were made way back, like you mentioned. Is this the time to suspend them, or is it too late?
No, I think it is. But that's not the president's call. I mean, the president could suggest, but it's actually legislators, basically members of parliament, many of whom are claiming that their constituents are really suffering. I think they should call an extraordinary session, or as they're considering supplementary budgets, to actually suspend some of these taxes that were brought in. I think they were brought in prematurely. It was too early because the economy had not necessarily started had not been on a firm mend. So obviously that's one. I think the other one is that there's an ongoing aggressive infrastructure development. Those need to be suspended. Irrespective of what the justification for that infrastructure is, the level of devastation that we see throughout the farms. And if you remember, 1.7 million people lost jobs last year, which is equivalent of jobs gained every 2 years. So the recovery had not taken place, and I think that suspending some of these big infrastructure would allow government to have a little space to be able to provide the support that is required, at least for farms, or if not that, then to actually dedicate some money to provide a tax cut for a while. So one of the things that should also happen until further notice, as the president said, is some kind of tax cuts that are allowed so that farms have more money, or at least have are in a better financial position and are able to repair their balance sheets. If you look at banks today, many of whom have been very successful for a while, it's very, very clear that with new taxes and the effect of 2020, it's very, very clear that the devastation was much, much stronger than we thought, and perhaps that government actually should have been kinder.
But Kwame, wouldn't that just be simply kicking the can down the road? Because then there's the interest that comes with these mega infrastructural projects. If they pause, there's interest of a longer period and there's no return on investment.
Okay, we can ask Trevor on another date whether all these infrastructure investments were required to begin with, because the infrastructure investments that have been made that have sunk Kenya into some kind of bottomless pit, where the payments are going to be made for a very long time and they haven't. I mean, I don't have to mention the names, we all know them. But the point is, at this moment, what government needs is to repair its balance sheet and also to ensure that there's no structural damage to the economy, by which I mean that if, for instance, 20% of farms died, it doesn't matter whether you have that infrastructure, who's going to pay for it and who's going to ensure that the return on investment takes place. So at this point, it's a preservation mode, both for the government itself, but also for farms that exist. So if you go out with a very aggressive taxation system, so for instance, if you have the minimum tax and there are no farms, because many of them will close and are sending workers home, it doesn't matter that you have that tax if nobody's earning revenues and is able to pay. So it's just basically common sense at this moment. Some difficult decisions need to be made. Some of them, the economics of it is very clear. It's about whether we have the political courage to call them.
Okay. Asha, this has impacted the entire nation. Yeah, you wanted to jump in there. Go ahead.
No. I was just listening to your question, yeah.
All right. I was saying that this has impacted the entire nation. So what kind of support would Kenya Red Cross require right now in order to reach to the most vulnerable people? And how are you operating? What are you operating on right now? Are you stable? Are you not? What do you need?
No, for sure we need support because, a lot of the resources we had and we got from our partners is what we actually used in the last period. And now we are looking at how to actually do some of the work that we are talking about. We still have opportunities, I think, to still do food distribution, and maybe the call is really on many of the organizations and Kenyans again, just like we did last year. I think we can still come together to ensure then that we take care of those that are not able to actually put food on the table. But again, when we talk about the cash transfer, I think for me this is really critical because it's not just about putting food on the table, but we know from the assessments we've done that some of them, some people used for other livelihood interventions to try and start off other probably small scale businesses at home now that they had lost their jobs. So it's really important that we are able to do this. But I think it's also important, Trevor, to just say that I think we shouldn't just continue with what we were doing last year. I think this is another opportunity to really get back to the table again and just see what is it that we need to do for the long haul, because some of these people will never go back to these jobs because some of the companies, yes, will reduce, some will probably close down like many others did last year. We've seen how the banks have also, lost on their profit. So it's about looking at new livelihood interventions for the communities. And I think sometimes as well is maybe when we concentrate too much on one category, then we forget the others. And I think that's why I like what you said, is that this is affecting the whole country. So we need to be careful about identifying where the vulnerabilities are, because then sometimes we all over-concentrate in some areas and some people are actually left out. And I think the coordination of how we do this is really critical.
What are you suggesting to the people on the ground right now when you speak to them? Because I know you interact with them a lot. Is agriculture the way to go? Because like you've mentioned, there are some jobs that will not really come back.
Yes, it is, but again, not in just the usual ways we've been doing or the same ways. And I think that's where then the question of how to deploy technology and how to also even look at different kinds of crops or products that are coming out of this. For example, when I'll have to keep going back to the other disasters, because I think this will only come as last year to compound the problem, is that for drought, when we continue to grow the same kinds of crops, year in, year out, and we know what the outcome would be, then we need to start changing and start looking at for example, drought-resistant crops in some of the areas. It's not easy for communities to accept, but I think that is a worthwhile effort, so that it's not a vicious cycle, and every time we just find ourselves in the same situation. But again, I think with young people in this country, we have seen a lot of initiatives in the last year, and I think they just need to be supported to continue exploring new areas of livelihood going forward.
Okay. I have to take a quick break here on the Monday Report Town Hall session. I see some of your feedback and a lot of questions coming through. I'll pose some of them to Dr. Asha Mohammed, who's the Secretary General, Kenya Red Cross, and Kwame Owino, CEO, Institute of Economic Affairs. They're still with me. See you in just a bit. Keep your views coming at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. See you in just a bit.